You're listening to Privacy and Security Insights, brought to you by PICCASO.
Hello, and welcome to this podcast episode, Why AI Fails Without Context. I'm joined by the CEO and co-founder of Trustworks, Dr. Padraig O'Leary. Padraig has dedicated his career to helping organizations build trust through better privacy practices. After working closely with hundreds of privacy leaders, data protection officers, legal teams, governance professionals, he has recognized the common challenge. The issue wasn't the lack of expertise, it was the lack of visibility and context, which is why he co-founded Trustworks back in 2020. So Trustworks, as we know, has become a leading privacy and AI governance platform, helping organizations to move from reactive compliance to proactive compliance. So really, his vision has always been simple and powerful. Privacy should start with people, not systems, legal documents, or technology. In recognition of that, Trustworks actually won the PICCASO award in the past for the most impactful data privacy product. And the company has also received international recognition for its work in AI. So please join me in welcoming Padraig O'Leary. Welcome, Padraig.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to speak to you today. I was looking forward to our conversation. And I think the PICCASO community is a very important community, and we've had some great nights at the PICCASO Awards over the years.
Yeah, it's great. And so for our listeners, we are going to be running probably about 15 minutes or so. So get yourself comfortable and get pens by ready for some wonderful insights that we're about to hear. So I think I was trying to set the scene there. You know, we've all been there. I'm a DPO myself. You know, we're operating in increasingly complex environments, right? New systems are being deployed, new vendors, new business processes, especially with AI, and those data flows that we're all so concerned about are under constant change, right? But at the same time, many governance programs still rely on, if you like, periodic assessments or manual reviews and disconnected records. And so the challenge is no longer understanding regulations. The challenge is also maintaining that visibility into what's actually happening across your organizations. So I am going to shoot straight from the hip. So why are privacy teams still struggling for visibility?
Thanks, Stephen. I think the framing I keep coming back to is this idea that most organizations don't actually have a compliance problem. They have a visibility problem. Mm-hmm. And once you really think about that idea, it kind of changes everything about how we think about governance. So generally what we see is that on paper, most organizations look fine. There's a ROPA, assessments are being completed, vendors are being reviewed, policies exist. But when you look at how the work actually gets done, you start to see the cracks. And that's particularly when you're operating in an organization that is moving very quickly. And it feels like every organization is moving very quickly right now in this AI era. And the challenge that compliance leaders have is how do they keep pace with that change? So how do they ensure that what they're assessing is actually the state of play today? And I think that's the big challenge that we see internally. We frame this as the context crisis, right, which is this idea that privacy and compliance professionals are operating in a context gap. So the information that they need to make decisions around the compliance program is completely scattered across emails, Slack channels, Teams threads, vendor assessments, legal documents, and therefore they end up investing a huge amount of their time actually trying to construct that context that they need in order to operate the compliance program.
That's really interesting. Fantastic observation. And obviously with Trustworks, you've got to meet so many DPOs and understand what's going on. I think you're right. There's so much information, almost, when you're skiing, you have that situation where it's kind of whiteout, where there's a slight snow, as well as, that poor visibility. So you're skiing down the mountain in virtual no visibility. So that's a bit similar to what you're describing there.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, because it's not that the rocks or the cliff faces don't exist. They exist, right? You just can't see them.
Exactly. There's that's sort of like, oh my word, let's hope we don't go off the track kind of feeling. Okay, so we talked a little bit about that operational context. I think you've touched on a little bit on why that's becoming so important. Maybe we'll just dig into that a little bit more. Can you just summarize what you think some of those contextual issues, cumulatively why that might become a problem, why it's so important?
Yeah, so let's say a privacy professional, a member of the compliance team, needs to decide whether a processing activity requires a DPIA or not. And so in this environment where they lack context, then the traditional approach would be to trigger a empty assessment, right? Where 80 or 90% of the assessment is made up with information gathering questions, collecting information that already exists within the organization, but the compliance team have not been able to surface.
Yeah.
Or alternatively, and what we're starting to see, particularly over the past 12 months, by a subset of compliance professionals, is that they're using an AI interface, right? So they're inside a Claude or Copilot, and they're dumping some project description or processing activity, high-level description, and they're asking the AI assistant to tell them if this is high risk, and therefore a DPIA is required.
Okay.
In both cases, they're not leveraging, or they're not able to access the context they need in order to make a decision around the processing activity. So in the first instance, huge amount of effort goes into filling that context, and then they're trying to perform that risk assessment, at the very end, based on a limited view of the actual environment in which the processing activity is occurring. And then the second instance, they're asking AI, they're getting a response. It sounds confident, but it's completely ungrounded in the operational context. So it's not considering, let's say, the current ROPA, other processing activities that are similar, previous risk assessments, the risk appetite of the organization. And then even when they have, let's say, completed this exercise, then that processing activity, it shifts, it moves, a new vendor is added, new categories of personal data are processed. And so when we talk about this lack of operational context, we're describing an environment where they're always looking over their shoulder. So they're always reacting to a situation that might be a historical view of how the organization, in this case, is using personal data.
That's really, really good description there, Padraig. Thank you. I think the contextualizing of all of this is so important. And if I think about where I'm working at the moment, we are using Copilot, as you suggested, but actually, as we know, with any of these tools, they're only as good as the data you put into them. So, the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. And that's the real danger here, and obviously hallucinations and things like that.
Yeah, the analogy I like to use, Steve, is imagine you hire a member of a compliance team, someone with experience,
Mhm.
They come in, they join day one, and then the first thing you ask them is to make a determination if a processing activity is high risk or not. That's
Yeah.
pretty much what we do when we're using an AI assistant, right?
Yeah.
It's got no context. It doesn't really know how things work within the organization. It sounds confident, but it's not grounded.
Yeah. And that's what I meant by hallucinations, because it kind of makes stuff up as well. I found it sort of drawing parallels with other things that I've never heard of. And then you're doubting the if you like, the credibility of what it's coming up with. I think the challenge also is that, because we're under such time pressure, using these tools is brilliant, right? It's fantastic. It helps us, but that contextualizing is a really good point of view. So tell me then, what does, if it, in an ideal world, what does good look like in practice?
Yeah, so the phrase I would use is continuous governance.
Okay.
And I think we need to be careful, right, that this doesn't sound more intimidating than it is. Doesn't mean that, we're on the clock 24/7 monitoring the organizations.
Yeah.
But what it does mean is that your systems stay connected so that you have this visibility into how your organization is using personal data. That doesn't require you to go out and run an assessment to get that view. So in practice, I think like there's three, let's say, examples of how continuous governance looks like in practice. So the first is if we think about ROPA management, the clients that we work with that are moving towards this form of governance, their ROPA is not something that is reviewed every 6 months or annually, but that they are it's something that is reflective of how the organization is working with personal data, the vendors that are involved in that process, the types of data that they're processing. And by connecting different sources of truth, we can maintain a live view of this processing activity. So an example is by connecting, let's say, a code base or understanding the capabilities that a particular vendor is providing to the organization. So by profiling these vendors. Second way would be if we think about assessments. So having a starting point for assessments, which is where they're much further along the life cycle. So that the starting point for an assessment is preloaded context. Preloaded in the sense of that we're already looking at let's say, the legal agreement, the data processing agreement, the security review, and then we're pre-filling the assessment with this context, which we've now gathered about the vendor, and then building it into the assessment so that when the assessment reaches the responsible person or the respondee, then the amount of effort that they have to do to validate is significantly less. And then the third is around risk, right? So let's say in the traditional reactive model, just like we talked about having our ROPA updated, you discover issues after operational decisions have already been made. So risk identification historically or traditionally has been, for the most part, when projects are already live. In a continuous model, we're identifying risks as it emerges based on design decisions. So by looking at the project management tool, by looking at our list of vendors, by looking at the types of data that are processed in a particular project or processing activity. And that's this idea of continuous governance, which is continuous visibility on how your organization is working with personal data.
That was very clear. 3 very good points there. So it's about the ROPA, it's about the assessment, it's about the risk, and that helps give that sort of 360 degree view of, if you like, the context of all of those requests coming into your privacy operations. I get that. That's brilliant. We're sadly running out of time. Always happens when we have such great guests and conversations, and we could probably sit here for another 20 minutes nattering on. But I'm afraid I'm going to wrap up now with one final question, and that's really about what tips would you give our listeners, if they're in a busy environment, or if they're using Copilot or Claude or whatever they're using, what tools, how would you help with that contextualization? What would you say? What would be your top tips, Padraig?
I would say focus on visibility before process.
Okay.
So it can sound counterintuitive, because our instinct when compliance is struggling is to add more forms, more reviews, more checkpoints. But if the underlying problem is that the teams don't have a reliable picture of what's actually happening across their system vendors and data flows, then more process just creates more friction, more work on top of an incomplete picture. So organizations that I've seen that are making real progress aren't necessarily the ones who've purchased, let's say, the most sophisticated tool. They're the ones that are serious about connecting their records. And so once you work with a platform or have use of a tool that helps you connect the dots between your systems, your vendor, your processing activities, and then you use that as your launch pad for your compliance operations, then it reduces the amount of work. It increases your ability to effectively assess and mitigate risk. And overall, it means a more efficient compliance program that is better at identifying and lowering organizational risk.
Thank you. That is really, really helpful. Padraig, always a pleasure talking with you. I can hear the beautiful bird song in the background of where you are, which is very peaceful and nice. I just want to thank you again for joining us here at PICCASO. So listeners, if you want more, if you want to find out more, if you want to reach out to Padraig, I think go via your website. Is that the best way to get hold of you, Padraig, if there's further questions?
Yes, absolutely. Please visit trustworks.io, and very happy to speak to anyone on this topic or other issues around compliance program.
Yeah, that's brilliant. No, that's great. Thank you very much, listeners. As always, I'm Steve Wright, signing off here. If you want to get involved with PICCASO, if you want to be part of the awards, the nominations are still open, but hurry, I think that date is closing. And just thanks, Padraig and Trustworks, for sponsoring us on this today. Without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to get out to our community of 8,000. So a big thanks to them. And without further ado, I hope everybody listening has a fantastic day. Thank you for joining, Padraig. Bye for now.
Thank you, Stephen.